So members, I will put before us the delete all amendment. It is the DE1 to 3315, and ask Ms. Parra to begin the walkthrough. Ms. Parra.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Article 1 is the general education, and it has 4 sections. Sections 1 and 2 modify the definitions of textbook and individualized instructional or cooperative learning materials to include a teacher's edition or teacher's guide that accompanies the materials. Section 3, about 10 years ago, the aid to districts, the special education litigation aid, was repealed, so this section just simply strikes that reference from the statute. Section 4 eliminates references to payments procedures. Those are obsolete references. Article 2, Education Excellence. Section 1 requires the initial serving school district to continue to provide transportation services to and from a cooperative program for a homeless student that has an individualized education program who changes serving school districts during the school year. It allows the initial and current serving school district to mutually agree to an alternative transportation arrangement. Section 2, Education Records. This section requires a school that is transmitting transferring students' educational records to a new school to include information about a pupil withdrawal, which is defined later, and to include information about services the pupil needs to prevent inappropriate behavior. Section 3, Legitimate Exceptions. Allows a student to be excused from school for up to 3 days to participate in any activity necessary to join a branch of the United States Armed Forces. Section 4, Required Academic Standards, has a new paragraph and modifies paragraph D. Paragraph D requires a school district to include child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation prevention instruction in a health curriculum. And it provides some information about what the curriculum has to contain. It allows the school district to consult with other agencies and community-based organizations to identify tools, curricula, and programs. And new paragraph E requires a school district to include instruction in a health curriculum for students in certain grades on substance misuse prevention, including opioids. Next few sections are all amending Section 120B11, which is the World's Best Workforce statute. And Section 5 adds 4 definitions, one for state plan, which is a reference to the state ESSA plan that was approved by the United States Department of Education. There are also definitions of an ineffective teacher, inexperienced teacher, and out-of-field teacher. Section 6 modifies performance measures. These are used by a school district to create the world's best workforce, and it modifies these performance measures by adding references to the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments. Section 7. This is the adopting plans and budgets section. The school board has to adopt the world's best workforce plans, and this section adds statewide goals in reference to the benchmarks that are required in the district's plan. Section 8 is report. Districts have to do world's best workforce reports, and the commissioner has to do a report under new paragraph B that includes school performance reports that have student performance using the performance measures that were modified in the previous section. Section 9, World's Best Workforce Annual Evaluation, requires the commissioner to use the performance measures to identify school districts and school sites not making sufficient progress. So it modifies the 3-year period. It requires the commissioner to review the curricula of all school districts, identify districts the curricula of all identified districts in all subject areas to make sure that the curricula are aligned with state standards. The section also requires identified districts to implement evidence-based strategies and best practices, and modifies the commissioner's report to the legislature by substituting progress toward meeting world's best workforce goals for the district's performance goals. Section 10 requires a school district to screen all students for dyslexia between the beginning of kindergarten and the beginning of second grade, as well as any student who shows characteristics of dyslexia from second grade on. Section 11 modifies Section 120B 122, which was a new section that was added last year, requiring the Department of Education to employ a dyslexia specialist. This section adds a paragraph requiring the dyslexia specialist to provide guidance to school districts and charter schools on accessing screening tools, implementing screening for characteristics of dyslexia, and participating in professional development opportunities on intervention strategies and accommodations for students with dyslexia. Section 12, secondary student personal learning plans, amends the personal learning plan statute to require that plans help students access armed forces career options, require school districts to grant military recruiters and representatives of careers in the skilled trades the same access to students that they do to colleges and employers, and encourages school districts to sponsor an armed forces career opportunity day each fall. Section 13 is a new codifies a new statute on substance misuse prevention, may be cited as Jake's Law, and it encourages school districts to integrate substance misuse prevention instruction into existing programs, curriculum, or school environment. It also cross-references the section a few sections ago that requires districts and charter schools to include this instruction in certain grades in the health curriculum. Section 14, statewide testing, requires the Commissioner of Education to administer the MCAs as late as possible each school year. Currently, students take the MCAs in March, April, or May, and it requires the Commissioner to publish the testing schedule at least 2 years in advance. You'll also see there are 3 paragraphs that are stricken out. That's obsolete language. It relates to students that entered grades 8 or that entered the 8th grade in 2009 or through 2012. So that language is obsolete now. Section 15, statewide and local assessments, clarifies that the MCA student performance data and achievements reports must be available to school districts and teachers within 3 days of the test. That changes on page 22 on lines 10 and 11. Section 16, reporting, requires a school district to disseminate preliminary individual student performance data and achievement reports for the MCAs to a parent and a teacher of a student within 30 days. And it requires the district to notify the parent and teacher that that data is preliminary and still needs to be validated. It also requires a school district to disseminate a testing report to the teacher and parent of each student before the beginning of the following school year, and that testing report has to identify the student's achievement level in each content area and track the student's performance history. Section 17, state growth target. This has several changes. One is that it requires the commissioner to consult with the state demographer to identify student categories used to report student academic achievement and growth. It also eliminates district-wide assessments as indicators of achievement, eliminates the requirement that the commissioner use a value-added growth indicator, and to identify schools as medium and high growth. And requires instead the commissioner to report an academic growth rate, which is defined later on, and modifies the graduation reporting requirements by striking out the reference to 4- and 6-year rates. Section 18 is a new section of law, academic achievement rating system. Subdivision 1 requires the commissioner to develop an academic achievement rating system for each school and district. Gives them a star rating and an academic achievement score based on measures set out to determine the rating. And those ratings have to be reported annually on school performance report. Subdivision 2 includes definitions for academic growth rate, low-income student achievement rate, student of color achievement gap score, four-year graduation gap score, low-income student proficient, statewide reading test, statewide math test, and student of color. Subdivisions 3 and 4 are the rating components, and Subdivision 3 is for primary schools, Subdivision 4 is secondary schools. These were discussed in when the bill was heard earlier. Two components were added to each subdivision. One is the English learner proficiency rate as defined in the approved state ESSA plan, and the other is the consistent attendance rate, also as defined in the approved state ESSA plan. Subdivision 5 is district rating components, which requires the commissioner to base district star ratings on the percentage of third grade students rated proficient on the statewide reading test, the low-income student achievement gap score at the district level, the student of color achievement gap score, the percentage of high school students rated proficient on the reading and math test, and the district's four-year graduation rate. Section 19, school performance reports and public reporting, requires the commissioner to report the school academic star and academic achievement ratings and to calculate growth rates as required by ESSA. Section 20 is student progress and other data, and that includes data used to set goals for federal expectations in the category of non-public data until the commissioner publicly releases the data. Section 21 Section 21 adds a definition of non-exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices, and this will be coded within the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act. And it defines non-exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices as policies and practices that require school districts to intervene in, redirect, and support a pupil's behavior before dismissing a pupil from school. And it includes several definitions of such practices, including social and emotional services or social work services. And that definition is referenced throughout in some of the following sections. Section 22 adds a definition of pupil withdrawal agreements to the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act. It's defined as a verbal or written agreement between a school or district administrator and a pupil's parent or guardian to withdraw the student from the district to avoid expulsion or exclusion proceedings. And those are limited to 12 months. Section 23 requires a school to use non-exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices before dismissal proceedings or pupil withdrawal agreements. Section 24 requires alternative education services when a pupil is suspended for more than 5 consecutive school days. Section 25, minimum education services, requires school officials to allow a suspended pupil to complete schoolwork during the suspension and receive full academic credit. It also encourages the principal to designate an employee as a liaison to allow a pupil to receive course materials and complete assignments. Section 26, written notice. This is within the exclusion-expulsion procedures statute, and it substitutes non-exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices where before it referenced alternative education services that had to be given to a pupil to avoid the expulsion proceedings. It also references legal assistance resource lists that will be posted on the Department of Education website. Section 27, admission or readmission plan, requires an admission or readmission plan to include measures to improve pupil behavior and parental involvement, and requires the parental involvement in the process. Section 28 student withdrawals, requires school boards to report student withdrawals through the electronic reporting system to the Department of Education and include a statement on non-exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices that were given to the pupil. Section 29, policies to be established, requires districts to adopt policies that include non-exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices to ensure that alternative educational services are provided. Requires districts to review a pupil's schoolwork and grades to ensure the pupil is on track for readmission, and provide them a list of mental health and counseling services. Those pupils that receive mental health services through the district, in the district, remain eligible for those services until they're enrolled in a new district. And it requires, finally, districts to notify parents of how those withdrawal agreements are reported and recorded. Section 30, essential data. This section requires the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, PELSB, to maintain a list of essential data elements that school districts have to provide about licensed and non-licensed staff members. This is a technical change. This was previously done by the Department of Education Licensing Division, and those functions have moved to PELSB. Section 31 eliminates the requirement that a clerk report to the commissioner the district's revenues as expenditures and some other data that is separately reported to the Department of Education by the school district. Section 32, alternative pupil, allows a non-public 10th grade student to take a career and technical education course offered by Minnesota State College or University through the post-secondary enrollment options programs. 10th grade students in school districts can already do this, can already have this option under the statute. Section 33 eliminates some language that became obsolete in 2013 when the graduation incentives program was modified. Section 34 modifies the submission of American Indian Education Parent Advisory Committee's reasons for not concurring with the educational programs for American Indian students offered by the school board or American Indian School. Section 35, the next few sections are in Chapter 124E, which governs charter schools, so these all apply to charter schools. Section 35 eliminates the requirement that an organization that is applying to be an authorizer have to provide an assurance that it is committed to being an authorizer for the full 5-year term. Section 36 accelerates by 1 year the election for an ongoing board of directors and provides that the term of office for that initial ongoing board starts July 1. Section 37, membership criteria, modifies the charter school board of directors membership criteria and requires the board structure to be stated in the school corporation's bylaws. Section 38 modifies the training requirements for charter school board of directors, prohibits an individual from being seated on the board until they've completed certain training. Other training they have 12 months to complete. And there's also some technical changes. Section 39 requires a hearing on non-renewal or termination of a charter school contract to be recorded at the authorizer's expense, and there are preservation requirements for the recording. Section 40, admissions requirements and enrollment. This section makes several changes. One you'll see is that the paragraphs are converted to subdivisions, and so they each have headings now. It adds an agent of a school to the prohibition on charter school distributing services or goods to students and parents, and adds a prohibition on distributing payments or other incentives to students or parents. Modifies the conditions in which a student is no longer considered enrolled in the district. And there's 2 changes to the lottery exceptions that are used when charter schools have to do lotteries. It allows or requires a charter school to give enrollment preference to children currently enrolled in the free preschool or pre-K program. I'm sorry, that was just moved up. That paragraph was moved up. But it provides a preference for students in the city of Nerstrand and Rice County that live within a 5-mile radius of a charter school. And it adds a preference for students within 2 miles of a charter school in Castle Rock Township in Dakota County. Section 41 requires a charter school to document its efforts to disseminate required information in its annual report. Section 42, again, that's that essential data provision, and that eliminates the requirement of the Department of Education maintain that data because Pellsby will now maintain it. Section 43 requires the basic skills annual expenditure report to be reported under the World's Best Workforce statute. Section 44 eliminates obsolete reporting requirements for the Minneapolis School District. Section 45, this again is a result of transferring licensing functions from the Department of Education to Pellsby, so it just eliminates a reference to that licensing division. Section 46 includes solicitation of children to engage in sexual conduct and communication of sexually explicit materials in the definition of sexual abuse. Section 47 modifies the paraprofessional pathway to licensure session law and makes charter schools eligible for grants for non-conventional teacher residency pilot programs. It also replaces a reference to the Board of Teaching with Pellsby. Section 48 is a reviser's instruction, which recodifies sections in intermediate school districts in Chapter 123C, which brings it within the K-12 education code. It's currently in the higher ed chapters. And 49 is the repealer, which repeals section on commissioner reporting best practices in schools that are high performing under federal expectations. It repeals a requirement that districts develop plans and strategies to improve graduation rates for students with emotional or behavioral disorders. Repeals a section that allows district to request the department to make a payment to a third party. A requirement that school districts report special education litigation costs, and the requirement that the Minneapolis School Board adopt and publish an operating budget and a capital budget for the subsequent year.
Ms. Parra, I'll give you a chance to sip your water to refresh yourself. Members and those in the audience, you need to know how hard how much time and what hard work it takes to put together a proposal like this. Ms. Parra, for example, who's nonpartisan, has worked countless hours and days to produce this product, meeting with us over the weekend. And of course, my staff, Ms. Peterson and Ms. Windsor and Mr. Withers, we all were here Saturday and Sunday to produce a product like this. So we need to give Ms. Parra just a chance to take a breath because we're now on the lesser pages of the proposal. And with that, I think, Graham, are you the only FFA in the audience visiting, or is it a variety of FFAers? Stand up so that we can recognize you. I saw all of you students walk in, and I did notice Graham on the back of one jacket, but can you call out where you're from? Thank you for visiting. This is Education Innovation Policy, and Graham is close to my district. I have closest to you would be Mora and Cambridge, so thank you for being here, and we'll resume then with our walkthrough. Article 3, everyone, on page 55. Ms. Parra.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Article 3 is the teacher article, and Section 1 amends the school counselor statute to require that school counselors present and explain armed forces career options and benefits to students and inform parents and students of the military enlistment exam. It allows counselors to consult with the Department of Labor and Industry on resources for students interested in careers in the skilled trades, and prohibits a counselor from interfering with a student's enlistment in the armed forces. Section 2 authorizes school employees who provide career advice to students to satisfy their professional continuing education requirements by attending training in armed forces, career options, or careers in the skilled trades. And Section 3 replaces a reference to the Board of Teaching with reference to Pelsby. Article 4, special education, establishes a special education working group to review special education delivery and costs. Subdivision 1 goes through the duties, the various issues the group has to examine, including funding and relevant laws. Subdivision 2 lists the members, and paragraph A is list of organizations, the executive director of which has to appoint or may appoint a representative to serve as a member, and paragraph B requires the Commissioner of Education to solicit applications for membership in the working group, and based on those designate certain individuals to serve as a member of the working group. Since the last time the bill that had this language was heard in this committee, some organizations were added to paragraph A, including the Schools for Equity in Education, Decoding Dyslexia. And in paragraph B, there are now 2 students receiving special education services and a parent of a student receiving special education services. The rest of that section relates to meetings, compensation, administrative support, and a report. The group has to submit a report with its findings to the legislature by January 15th, 2019. And the legislature that convenes next year is encouraged to convene a study group to review those recommendations, to develop its own recommendations for legislative changes. Article 5, facilities and technology. This article adopts requirements for technology providers, school districts, and school districts relating to, and charter schools and non-public schools relating to educational data that those technology providers have, and also for student devices.
And Ms. Parra, this places this in the education code. Members, you probably noticed that, instead of Chapter 13.
Madam Chair, that's
Ms. Parra.
correct. Yes, so Section 1 is actually amends the charter school chapter, simply saying that the charter school has to comply with those sections that are in Chapter 125B, 27 to 25, that govern the technology providers, school-issued devices, and educational data. Yes, those other sections are all in Chapter 125B, which generally has technology requirements. Section 2 is technology provider requirements, and it imposes new requirements on technology providers and schools that contract with those providers. Technology providers are defined as a person who contracts with a school district to provide technological devices for student use, and who creates, receives, or maintains student data under the contract. These technology providers have to comply with the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. They do not own the data that they hold under the contract, the educational data. These providers have to comply with the data breach notification law. They have to destroy or return to the school all educational data created, received, or maintained under the contract. And they cannot sell, share, or disseminate educational data except as a part of a valid delegation or assignment of the contract with the school. But they can't use the educational data for any commercial purpose, such as advertising. And Subdivision 3 requires these technology providers to establish written procedures to secure the educational data and allow only authorized individuals to access the data. They also have to maintain a log of use that records information regarding when individuals access student data. Those are generally referred to as audit trails. Section 3 imposes requirements on the school districts. Subdivision 1 requires the district to notify parents and students of the technology provider contracts at the start of the school year, and requires the school district to post the contracts on the district website. Subdivision 2 prohibits a school from penalizing a student who opts out of a technology provider program. Subdivision 3 requires an audit trail, like the one that is required for the technology providers. Subdivision 4 requires the school district to provide training on student privacy laws for new personnel with access to student data, and to provide written training materials for all personnel and independent contractors. Section 4 is school-issued devices, which are defined as any technological device that a school issues to a student for the student's dedicated personal use. It prohibits a government entity, including law enforcement or technology provider, from using a location tracking device, accessing the device's camera or microphone, or monitoring student interaction with a device. And Subdivision 3 provides exceptions to that prohibition. For example, if it is done for an educational purpose and the student consents, if it's allowed by a judicial warrant, if the device is missing or stolen, if it's necessary to protect the health or safety of a student, or to investigate compliance with the school's acceptable use policy. Subdivision 4 requires a government entity or technology provider that monitors the device for students' health or safety to provide notice of that to the student or parent, unless it would pose a threat to health or safety. And Section 5 makes those provisions apply to non-public K-12 schools. Article 6, nutrition. Section 1, food service contracts, clarifies a cross-reference that allows a contract between a school board and a food service management company that complies with federal regulations governing summer food service programs and the child and adult care food program to be renewed for up to 4 years. Section 2, respectful meals policy, clarifies that a school district may collect unpaid meal debt as long as the reminders do not demean or stigmatize a child participating in the school lunch program and meets other requirements. It prohibits the school district from denying a school lunch to participating students, even if the student has an outstanding meal balance, and requires the district to provide meals to participating students in a respectful manner. Prohibits withdrawing the meal after it's been served, whether or not the student has a meal balance. Article 7, early childhood and family support. Sections 1, 2, and 3, all three sections modify early learning scholarships requirements. Section 1 exempts parents or guardians of children who are in protective services or homeless from requirement to provide income verification to qualify for those scholarships. Section 2 extends the time for a child under the age of 3 who receives a scholarship to complete the developmental screening. And Section 3 strikes the provision that allowed a pilot site to qualify for a scholarship before becoming rated through the Quality Rating and Improvement System. And finally, Article 8 clarifies language regarding high school equivalency tests. Last year, the law was amended to allow the commissioner to select more than one high school equivalency test, and each of these sections simply clarifies language relating to that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Parra, and thank you for the work that you have done to accommodate us in preparing this proposal.